We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Abby Ape. I'm the Managing Director for the Brickell Homeowners Association. Thank you.
I feel so good even.
This is not just.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, sounds like we need to ask everybody to mute.
For those who can't take a timeout, Walgreens.
I apologize for that. My ad went off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Abby Ape. I am the Managing Director for the Brickell Homeowners Association. We are here today to discuss a little bit more what it is to have unarmed and armed security personnel and understanding the basic fundamentals of that all. During the next hour, we will have the privilege of learning from our guest speaker, Mark Hall. He has many years of experience in the field, over 22, I believe, Mark, but he'll let us know in a few minutes all of those details about his experience. And he definitely brings a wealth of knowledge and insight that will undoubtedly enrich us all in this topic that's very necessary. Now, before we proceed, just want to encourage your active participation. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to drop them in the chat option. We will stand by and answer as many inquiries as possible. Now, I also want to let you know that this live stream is being broadcasted via YouTube and will be available for future viewing and redistribution within your networks. You're going to be able to share it with as many people as possible, and it will be viewable on YouTube. So before we begin, Mark, I'll let you have the floor. Would you like to share a little bit more about your company and your many, many years of experience?
Absolutely, Abby. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and making me part of this. Brickell Homeowner Association is a well-established and well-recognized organization, and I'm proud to partner with all of you. So I'll start with a little about myself, and okay, here we go. So just my background, I'm a retired police chief, did 22 years in law enforcement here in Palm Beach County. Immediately following that, I was the director of security at a location called Frenchman's Creek in Palm Beach Gardens. I did that for 8 years. Was a phenomenal introduction into the residential security industry, where they were very serious about their security. We had 25 full-time staff. We had a Marine unit that patrolled our waterways. I had 2 canine units who patrolled on duty. I had 24/7 paramedic service that I also managed under the security. Nighttime tactical officers. And it was quite a program, and it was quite a transition from law enforcement into the security industry. I hold my board certification in security management through ASIS and have for 10 years now. And I'm a CPTED practitioner in the state of Florida. CPTED is the Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And my business, as I travel the US and I conduct security assessments for residential communities, I specialize in condominiums and gated communities from Las Vegas to Hilton Head. From Hilton Head to Las Vegas to Miami. So I do it all over the US.
Mark, Mark, I apologize. There was a little bit of an issue. If you don't mind starting off where we just, like at the very beginning of the presentation.
Okay. So, well, thank you for inviting me, Abby, along with the Brickell Homeowner Association. A little bit about my background. I'm a retired police chief, did 22 years in law enforcement in Palm Beach County. I was the director of security at Frenchman's Creek in Palm Beach Gardens, which was a high-end gated community, 25 full-time staff. A great transition from law enforcement into the private security industry, where I oversaw the officers. We also had Marine unit, 2 canine officers, nighttime tactical officers, and I also oversaw the advanced life support paramedics who also were there 24/7. So that was quite an intense program. I hold my board certification in security management through As Is. It's my CPP certification. I've been a CPP for 10 years. My CPTED practitioner certification, which is a crime prevention through environmental design. That's what CPTED stands for. And I travel all over the US conducting security assessments of residential communities, condominiums, gated communities, from Las Vegas to Hilton Head to Miami. So I've done that kind of all over. I did serve on the was a task force member for the CAI, Community Association Institute, who, when they were rewriting the security best practices manual. And I'm actually hoping that to come out here pretty soon. And let me see, it's can't see the bottom. I'll move on to the next slide. So today we want to talk about the pros and cons of armed security versus unarmed security in a residential setting. We'll speak specifically about Florida. That's where I have most of my knowledge, hold all of my licenses and certifications. I have traveled to other states, and there are some differences in other states, but we can discuss those specifically if anybody has any questions. But we'll be specifically addressing Florida. So ultimately, the question is my first question is, well, why does the board or property management or the residents feel they need armed security? What is your justification? So I really think that's the first question that a board or a property manager or GM or the residents need to address. What justifies the need for an armed security staff? And we're going to talk about some of those perceptions or facts. So one of the questions under this justification is have you had violent crimes committed by outsiders on your property? Do you need armed security for violent residents? Some will say, no, the outside people coming in aren't the problem. It's the residents. That's typically not the issue in a gated community or condominium. That issue is typically more prevalent in the multifamily apartment setting or vertical. But these are the questions you need to ask. Is violent crime an identified issue in your area? In other words, do you have verified crime statistics that indicate that your region of where your community lies actually is experiencing crimes, violent crimes? I'm not talking about rumors and conjecture and things of that nature. One of the beauties of belonging to an organization like the Brickell Homeowners Association is they're very well connected with the local police departments, and you should have no problem getting crime stats for your region, for your community. And these are one of the things that you need to look at is violent crime an identified issue? It can be verified through crime data or crime statistics. The other question is, are your residents demanding armed security? If they are, why? You will have it in times where you'll just say, well, bad guys won't want to come in to our community if our guards are armed. So I can tell you that the community that I ran for 8 years, all of the staff were armed. They all wore Stetsons and ties, and it was a very intense program. And I can tell you that on more than one occasion, bad guys came over our walls to steal cars or break into homes. So the officers at the front gates who had a firearm did not dissuade the criminals that we encountered over the years from attempting to steal vehicles or break into homes. So that was my personal experience over 8 years. All of the all of the staff that I had to be either prior law enforcement or prior military. So these were all people who had had extensive training beyond just getting their security license, and had extensive prior training. And it didn't dissuade the criminals. So that was my experience. But it is a question you need to ask. If the residents are demanding it, it doesn't mean that it's necessary or justified just because they're requesting it.
Thank you, Mark, and I'll let you keep going. Just wanted to point out to you that we asked in a poll, do you have armed or unarmed security? And a lot of the audience is saying they have unarmed security. So I think, we're speaking to a mixed crowd here today, just so you know, it's
Okay.
10% armed, 71% unarmed.
Okay. So, and then the final question is there any proof or data supporting armed security reduces crime? And I am unaware of any studies that have been done that indicate that an officer wearing a firearm reduces it. It is a common belief, but just because it's a belief doesn't mean it's absolutely true. So the next and some of the most important questions are going to be, does your board, your property management company, your GM, and your residents understand the limitations of armed and unarmed security staff? I have, in traveling the country, in dealing with boards and some property managers, but it's not so much the property management as it is residents who believe that the security staff can almost act as law enforcement. And I'm talking about chasing people down, taking them into custody, detaining them, and things of that nature in a residential security setting. So I think it's important to understand that licensed Florida security officers are trained to observe and report. They are to be great witnesses and call 911. So the idea that your security staff, armed or unarmed, that their role is to physically pursue or detain trespassers or people committing crimes within the community is not how they are trained. There are, and again, we'll stick to Florida, there are some very specific statutory entitlements with security that do allow them to detain suspects of crime, and it's typically in the retail setting. There are a few, but the retail setting is where statutes do allow it. But you'll find that 98% of retailers do not want their security staff putting their hands on anyone because of the exposure to liability and things of that nature, which is also the reason why board members, GMs, and communities should also not want their staff, security staff, to put their hands on anyone, because it then begins to expose you to liability. And the reason it does is because the training requirements for security staff are such a low threshold that you're not going to find that they have a great deal of experience dealing with de-escalation, detention techniques, and things of that nature. So more limitations is, as I've said, they don't respond to acts of violence or chase criminals. What they are allowed to do is to defend themselves or the residents when faced with violence or the threat of violence. So one of the misnomers is, especially in a gated community or even in a condominium, if you have a patrol officer, is that if there's an act of violence going on in the clubhouse or in the building or in a facility, and say let's use extremes, there's an active shooter Well, the person you're paying $15 an hour with minimal training is not going to run into an active shooter scenario. And there's a number of reasons why they are not and why they should not. But security staff, again, is there to report and be a great witness. They're not there to chase criminals or respond to active incidents of violence or crimes in progress. So I think that's a misnomer. And if you have a security company, I would welcome you to pose that to them and their insurance company and say, if there was an act of violence occurring in my building, in my clubhouse, or in my facility, do the policies and procedures, or what is commonly called post orders, do they tell that officer that they are to run to the crime, armed or unarmed, and take an active role? And they will all tell you, no, that is not what they're instructed to do. The only time they're instructed to use any type of force, and that's why I've underlined this in the PowerPoint, is when they're faced with it. So if they are confronted with some act of violence where they need to protect themselves, they are certainly allowed to do it. And if the person they're being paid to protect, so a resident or a guest, if they're with a resident or guest and there's an act that occurs, they are fully entitled to take action. And we're really talking more about the active shooter or active assailant where something bad is happening, and if they have the ability to take action. So these are two things that I have found in my travels that it's one of the most important things that need to be addressed right up front is what the limitations of licensed security staff are, armed or unarmed. Because understand, even police officers, and we'll use the active assailant or active shooter situation, they don't have the equipment. They're not all wearing bulletproof vests. They don't have ballistic shields, ballistic helmets, rifles. They haven't received the training to do room clearing and things of that nature. So you would be asking someone who doesn't have any of the training to go in and take action in a situation that would put them in peril and jeopardy. All for whatever it is you're paying them per hour, which ranges anywhere from, typically $14 to $18 an hour right now in Florida. And it can be a couple dollars more in some of, if they're armed, and some of the higher end communities. And as we've said, the last thing is that they don't have the training or equipment to respond to these crimes in progress. So in talking about armed versus unarmed, one of the things that comes up is, what are the considerations or costs if I do want to go armed? You may be perfectly justified in that decision based on the crime statistics or the wants or needs of the community, and you want to go down that road. So I think the first thing you need to do is speak with your insurance provider. I have found in dealing with different communities that ultimately insurance providers are not a huge proponent of armed security staff in their communities. Some will either say no, some will say that it will increase your premiums tremendously. But it is certainly one of the first things I think that a board or GM needs to make sure that they have checked prior to going down this road, so they understand the financial impact that may occur. Liability exposure. I think right behind the insurance company, you'll need to speak to the association's attorney to get their take on it. And right now, really what I've limited my discussions about is if you are contracting with a third party for your security / access control. If you're running an in-house program where the security or access control or concierge or whatever it is you want to call them are your direct employees, this has a much greater impact. Because many times your insurance company or your attorney will say, listen, we're going to put all of that exposure and liability on this third party provider that we're hiring. But if you are an in-house program, you bear all of these costs and all of this exposure in regard to liability. So it's certainly important for you to speak to your attorney who represents your association. As an example, it is typically it's $1 to $2 more an hour for an armed officer. So every $1 increase you add for a 24/7 armed officer adds about $14,000 per year to your contract. It can be $2 to $3. $2, I think, is the average. So you're looking at that $28,000 plus addition for adding the armed guard or a firearm to your existing guards. And it's an important question to ask. Is we've talked about insurance premiums, we've talked about liability. Now the question is can you afford it? Can your community afford it? So I think that's very important. So budget wise, is it the wisest decision for you? So a topic that I see on the websites of many security companies is how highly trained their armed security staff are. So let me kind of put this out there, and that is, aside from companies that say only hire law enforcement trained or military trained staff, okay, which is a small percentage, the greatest percentage of companies, they're hiring civilians because many security positions are entry level positions that people get while they're transitioning to other things, that they receive 40 hours of training for their general or their D license in the state of Florida, and another 28 hours of training if they want to carry a firearm. I can tell you that that is as low a level as training is possible, and it covers the bare minimum. I was an instructor in the police academy here in Palm Beach County for numerous years, firearms instructor. So I'm very aware of what I saw over the years with people going through the law enforcement academies. And I see what the curriculum is for the security officers. And basically, they spend 8 hours, if that, out on a range. They are made to fire a firearm and qualify one time. And then every 2 years after that, they have to requalify. Besides that, there's really no other training that's required or typically that occurs. So one of the main considerations is understand who you're handing this firearm to and has the ability to make life or death decisions. And I can tell you, the majority of the people that this is being that this responsibility is being handed to are certainly not highly trained at all. I do see on the websites how the security companies brag about it, but it is simply a marketing ploy, not one that there can be a lot of backing for. Again, aside from companies that hire individuals who have a background or history in the military or law enforcement. And understand, dealing with firearms is what's called a perishable skill. So just because you were in the military or just because you were in law enforcement, unless you keep up that annual training, it's perishable. So because 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you were a cop or you were in the military, doesn't mean that you have kept up that training and that you would still be considered what most would consider highly trained. Um, so it is perishable and it's important to keep up with in order to maintain the readiness and the preparedness to employ deadly force. The other thing that lacks, I think, industry-wide, certainly in what I've seen, is that you'll have armed security officers, and that's all they have is a firearm. They don't have what's called less lethal or intermediate options. So if you look at the police, you'll see the police will have OC spray. A lot of people call it mace, but pepper spray. They'll have an impact weapon. They'll have a taser. There's a reason for that. The reason for that is you don't want to go from going from giving an order to tell somebody to do something or not do something to deadly force. When you don't have anything in the middle, it's where you typically get yourself in trouble, especially with someone who's untrained, not accustomed to dealing with use of force situations. And in the security industry, the companies don't want to pay for all of this training and all of these intermediate or less lethal weapons. It's expensive because if you do it right, you have to purchase all of this equipment. You have to retrain everyone every year to maintain certifications and training levels. And typically the clients don't want to pay for all of that either. So due to the expense, it is something you don't usually see. You just see a firearm and really nothing else on the security staff that would be considered intermediate or less lethal, which means they go from telling somebody to do something or not to do something. The only other option they have is a gun, and that's never good. So, and these are the things we're talking about. They're not receiving self-defense training or techniques. They're not carrying OC. They don't have impact weapons. They're not carrying tasers. So that means they go from command to deadly force. And that is certainly an exposure to huge exposure to liability. And then, as I said, then there's the costs of retraining and recertifications with all of these less lethal or intermediate options. And it's not something the company wants to pay for, and it's certainly not something the client wants to pay for. It is an expensive endeavor. So, as I've mentioned before, one of the issues is what is the perception or how much more training do you think armed security officers receive? And ultimately, the curriculum, as outlined for the state of Florida, 12 hours they get in the legal aspects of use of firearms, and then they get 8 hours of firearms safety and mechanical training. And then 8 hours, they actually go to a range and they shoot 144 rounds. That's it. So they get 20 hours in a classroom and 8 hours on the range. And I can tell you all 8 hours isn't firing the firearm, but that's just the way the state breaks it down. That is it. That is the long and short of all the extra training that someone in the state of Florida gets in order to carry a firearm and have the ability to use deadly force. So in my commentary prior to this slide, leading up to this, this is why I feel it's so important that this decision be very well thought out prior to being made. So ultimately, unless they are military or law enforcement who keep up their training, they are not well trained. and they are not equipped to make life and death decisions. And then the exclusion, obviously, is the prior law enforcement military, only if they have continued to keep up their certifications and their trainings, and that is very expensive. So I talked earlier about when I review these websites of various security companies, and I read about how they have all of their highly trained officers and all the things that they're able to do and all the training they receive. And I see photos, and when I actually visit sites, of security officers who are wearing these tactical vests, and they've got guns, and they've got handcuffs, and they've got all of these things that make them look like these SWAT officers. And I can tell you what this does is it makes these officers feel as if they have far more they feel far more empowered to take action on things that they really aren't empowered to do. And when I see companies who outfit their security staff in these tactical style vests with all this equipment hanging from it, it really makes me worry. Creates the belief that the security officer has more authority than he really do. A lot of times, again, it makes him a cop wannabe. And that's a problem, because that exposes the client and the company, if there's a third party company, to liability. It creates security officers with this us versus them mentality, not a customer service mentality. Your staff, your security, your access control staff should be customer service based, not enforcement based. That should be the mindset. And if the mindset is one of the person that is wearing these tactical vests with all this equipment, it's going to be the us versus them, not the customer service. So it's important that we don't create a situation where it makes them feel, one, that they can do more than they're really authorized legally to do, and two, that they're not really just there for access control and customer service. Again, it may result in them taking actions that expose the community to liability, and they're not perceived by others as service providers. And that's really what we want. Security staff should be service providers or access control staff, whichever it is you choose to call the people who are doing this. We really want them to have the mindset of customer service, and that's what they should be trained on, and that's how they should be utilized.
And Mark, I feel like that's almost has to be like a culture shift in condo associations, because when I see security, I do see them as like the enforcer, which to a certain extent they are, right? Not of deadly force, but they are an enforcer. So I like that you're saying that it is important to have them in a customer service mentality, rather than just potentially like an aggressor, or that you're mentioning. I think that's a very interesting point to point out, because that's not initially what most people think of.
And listen, do I want, I'll call them the gatekeepers. Do we want the gatekeepers to be seen as the people, again, who control access to your community? Yes, we do. But I can tell you, the staff I had, we were all taught and mandated to implement Ritz-Carlton customer service principles. Things like, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, which meant that we are always going to act as ladies and gentlemen. And regardless of who we're dealing with, whether it's the CEO, the GM, the board president, or the housekeeper, or the landscaper, we treated them all the same, because we were ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And I help communities when I travel, help change that culture if it is a problem. I do this through providing training on scripted communication. So when somebody drives up to the gate, it's not, where are you going? Or things of that nature. You know, for mine, my script was, welcome to Frenchman's Creek. I'm Officer Hall. How may I assist you today? And I can tell you, it makes a great impression on residents, guests, on vendors, and because it's so professional and because it's so customer oriented, they'll be a little taken back, and it makes them view that officer or that access control officer or security officer in a much more positive light. So the other thing is, somebody if is another example is, we never, if somebody said thank you for something, we never said you're welcome. My staff, the words that came out of their mouth was, it's my pleasure. So it's these little things that can be taught, and can be placed right into your policies and procedures and your protocols, whether you have an in-house program or whether you have a third-party provider. You can require that this is the training they receive and this is how they act. When my staff answered the phone, it was, thank you for calling Frenchman's Creek. This is Officer Hall. How may I assist you today? We did allow some alternatives. If the gate officer, somebody pulled up, it was always welcome home or welcome back. They always waved at residents when the residents came through. Again, these were Ritz-Carlton principles that became who we were. It became exactly what you said, Abby. It became the culture of the staff. And there was no other option. We all answered the phone the same way. We all greeted guests, visitors, vendors the same way. We were ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. That is, in my belief, how residential security should perform. So it is certainly exactly what you said. It is the culture, and the culture will be whatever the community allows or stands for. And if they don't allow it, then that culture will change, or that company will have to find staff that are willing to accept that culture. So going back to the uniforms and how they look. So one of the recommendations I make is to require your security provider to uniform the staff in professional, attractive uniforms. Here are examples. It can be something as you don't have to wear a tie. There's examples of uniforms with ties and kind of formal. Then there's in the middle, there's some without. They still look professional. Or if you want a more relaxed look, you can do the soft shirt and the soft pants. To me, I like the one in the middle the best. If you have a very high-end community, I like the ties. But I think the ones in the middle, the short sleeve, uniform style shirts, I'm sorry, and the slacks, I think those give the best presentation. The problem I think a lot of employers and a lot of communities have is that it just seems like generationally, no one knows what an iron is anymore. And they come in and their shirts and their pants aren't ironed or pressed. So it's just easier for them to say, well, listen, you can go to a soft uniform, which is the picture on the end there, where they can just pull it out of the dryer and they don't have to worry about ironing or creasing anything. But it's up to you. But the client, the condominium or the gated community, they set these standards. The security company should not be dictating to you what your uniform is. They should have a number of options. And then based on those options, the community needs to determine what they want the first impression to be of people who enter that community, because that security officer or that access control officer is the first glance into your community. And I can tell you, I've gone into somewhat communities that I consider great communities, but I can tell you that first impression stinks. And is that really what you want to say about your community and your residents and who you are and what you stand for? So this is my recommendations: that go to a professional uniform, stay away from the SWAT team look. And to me, the officers, when they look professional and they feel professional, they'll act professional. And that's what you want, professionals. Not what I used to call is cowboys, people who are just looking for confrontation. So what questions should the board answer to make this decision? One of the things I talked to Abby about is, I don't come in here and tell you what you should or shouldn't do. What I think is important is to pose to you the appropriate questions that you should be asking in order to make an informed decision. So is it justified? And we've talked about determining how to determine if it's justified with crime stats in your community or crime stats in your region. In and around the property, documented, not rumors, not conjecture, not I heard this, I heard that. Is there a fear of crime in the community? If do you have just one board member who says, listen, I was a cop in New York for 20 years. They should all be armed. They should do this. They should do that. You can't allow that to take over informed, educated decisions. Make sure that your decision is based on factual information. And then some of the other points we raised. Does your insurance company support it? Does your community attorney support it? Do your residents support it? Is that what they want? And then can your community afford it? Do you have the budget for it? So if you're in a community where it's 500 hours a week, that's going to be a significant increase at $2 an hour. That could be the difference between making your budget and not making your budget. So it's very important to look at. What I typically recommend, if you have the budget, I'd rather see you pay an unarmed officer more money. So if you're at $16 an hour and you can afford to go to 18, I'd rather you see you pay somebody who's unarmed and get a better quality officer at $18 an hour unarmed. And I think typically you will find that there's far more benefit to that. So with that, I know it was a lot of information in about 40 minutes. And I wanted to, I think, open it up to questions or comments or concerns so we can talk about it.
Yeah, if you have any further questions, feel free to send that in the Q&A box at the bottom or drop them in the chat. We did have a question from Ravi. I think it's more of a curiosity question. It says, if armed security do not deter crime, why do residents want it? Is it to calm people down?
Well, it's that misnomer or this belief that somehow because they have a gun, bad guys won't come into your community. And I will speak specifically of my community that for 8 years in a very nice region of the county, we were all armed. And I can tell you, we, on many occasions, had people cut through our fences, jump over our walls, and steal cars or attempt to steal cars, attempt to break into homes. So the argument that is made is, if a bad guy pulls up to the front gate and sees a gun, he or she is not going to want to commit a crime in the community. The truth of the matter is, the bad guys know that they could walk right up to a car and steal it in front of a security officer. That gun doesn't mean anything. So when we deal in facts, the fact of the matter is the only time that firearm comes into play is if the officer's life is in danger or serious physical injury, or a person he's being paid to protect's life is in danger or possible serious physical injury. That is the only time that that firearm would be legally allowed to be unholstered. And that's typically not the scenarios that our security runs across. But if you're in, listen, if you're in a high crime area and there's constant violent crimes of violence at all times and or surrounding your community or in your community, that's a different discussion. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I have found that being armed does not stop or prevent crime in a community.
Right. And you know, in Brickell, a lot of the crime that we do see, it's not assault or any of that. What we see a lot is theft, theft of bikes, theft of car parts. There was recently a big news story where an army of thieves went into a condominium. They used a stairwell and they took bikes. They even used like power tools to remove the bikes off of
Yeah.
the rails. We never saw security in the footage, and it was about a 30-minute situation. Granted, there was a lot of them, so I know that in the Brickell area, our crimes are a little bit different. Nonetheless, they're still there, and you know, educating on the different.
So one of the things that's really important is to understand that having security staff or access control staff in your community, again, it's not necessarily going to prevent the crime. Even if you have patrol, it doesn't mean they're going to catch them or it's going to prevent anything. With the advancements in technology, I will tell you, cameras with video analytics and remote monitoring, that is the next, it's not the next, it is currently one of the best ways to catch crimes in progress, get law enforcement started in that direction and things of that nature. And this technology is being used for everything from, you know, a camera that monitors the bike racks or the storage area. And then when there's motion in there, it sets off an alert or an alarm where either somebody who's remotely monitoring it or somebody in a gatehouse is monitoring it. They get the alert, they call law enforcement, and law enforcement comes and deals with it. But it also has a property management aspect to it, meaning things like when your facilities are closed, your pools, your fitness centers, your golf shop. When you have cameras that monitor those areas with video analytics, those video analytics will tell you if somebody goes into the pool area after hours, if somebody is in the fitness center when they shouldn't be. So I will tell you, and this is a whole nother webinar, that the advances in the utilization of technology, cameras, and video analytics, that's really one of the most proactive ways to address many of the concerns of your members and people watching today. And it's one of the things I get called for the most to go travel and assist communities in doing is taking a look at the community, seeing what the issues are, and then utilizing technology to then address those concerns proactively. I'm not talking about a camera that takes the video and then 2 days later, when you realize something been stolen, you can try and go back and look and see if you can see who it was. I'm talking about proactive, real-time alerts that when something's happening that shouldn't be happening, the technology today will alert you, and then you can have the policies and procedures in place to get the right people headed in that direction to address it.
Yeah. Eliana Gonzalez says very informative. Mark is great. Thank you, Eliana, for tuning in. I have an anonymous attendee. I don't fully understand the question, but I'm going to try my best to share it. There's a little bit of a typo here. It says, in your opinion, does video monitor just memorialize an event? Any recommendations requesting response time analytics for the monitoring company?
No, it's great. It's what we just talked about. it's exactly what we talked about. So what's being asked here is, does it memorialize event, which is what I was just discussing. 10 plus years, 15 years ago, that's what video cameras did. You would always be able to go back to the video and then based on the video, try and determine what was going on. Who, maybe it was a kid who lived in the community or a resident. And maybe if you were lucky, you could identify them through the video. That's what that question's about. There's nothing wrong with that. You can still do that, but that's not specifically what I'm talking about. I am talking about real-time, proactive video that is in an area. There's video analytics set up that alert you, or it can be the officer at the gate, or it can be a video monitoring center that monitors all of your alerts. If you had no staff, I go to many communities that don't have security or access control at all, and they want to address these issues. And I can tell you, one of the probably most cost-effective ways to do it isn't necessarily hiring a security company. It may very well be, depending upon the individual circumstance, employing technology with somebody who remotely monitors and receives the alert. And when they receive that alert, they're calling 911 for that area and getting law enforcement en route while things are happening right in front of them. And so that was what that question was about. And it's here now. I can tell you back in 2012, when I started with Frenchman's Creek, it was more of a military. My community was one of the first ones to use military grade thermal imaging cameras on their perimeter, along with video analytics. I can tell you in the last 11 years, the cost of those cameras have come down so tremendously, and the cost of the video analytics or not the cost, but the improvement of what you can do with it is tremendous. And it's really the way of it's here now, and it's going to be the way of the future, to do something the most fiscally efficiently and effectively.
That's right. And for those people that don't know, Brickell has a lot of CCTV cameras that are monitored by the police department. And so someone mentioned in the chat anonymously, police will not prioritize calls that are not life or safety matters. I cannot speak to that, but anybody
No. What they're talking about is in law enforcement, when law enforcement gets a call, it depends on the community. It depends on the size of the department. It depends on a lot of things. That's the difference between video analytics, though, and say a sensor. So if you had a sensor on your perimeter and it gets tripped, law enforcement's not coming. If a monitoring center calls the local police department and says, I have 3 subjects, it's 2:00 in the morning, I have 3 subjects climbing over the wall into my community, into this community we're monitoring, and they're walking into building such and such, and they have hoods and they're wearing this, law enforcement will respond. So it's one of those things where what your relationship is with your local police department, it's a great discussion to have before making that investment, that you sit down with your police department and you ask them and have that discussion and say, listen, if we're going to go to video monitoring and I've got 3 people at 2:00 in the morning doing this, will you respond? I can tell you the greatest percentage of that police departments are going to tell you, yes, they will respond. But it is a valid question and a valid point. I don't want to take away from the question, because if you just tell police we have a sensor or we have an alert or we have this, and you can't tell them what it is, chances are, I agree with the comment, they won't respond. But if you can tell them actually what's happening in real time, I can tell you that most of your police departments will be on board with you.
And for anybody that's on the call, just so you know, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we're having a community walkthrough with the police commander for our area, Andy Valdez. So if there's any questions you have in terms of security from the police side, you're more than welcome to ask him those questions tomorrow in person at 9 a.m. If you want any more details about that, I'd be happy to send those over to you. But we are closing in on our time mark. Is there anything that you want to leave our audience with before we tune out?
You know, again, I thank you for the opportunity to partner with the Brickell Homeowner Association and all of its members. My phone number is there, my website's there, my email is there. I certainly invite any of your members, if they have any questions, reach out to me. I have no problem helping them, guiding them along. I am a business member of the Brickell Homeowners Association as well. And again, I truly believe in partnerships and paying it forward. And I would welcome the opportunity to help give a little guidance. And I'm right here in Palm Beach County, so you're a quick drive, and it gives me a good excuse to come down and go to lunch down in Brickell.
Well, there's definitely plenty of places to dine down here. And so, Mark, thank you so much for sharing this very informative presentation. We look forward to many more in the future, and I think this is an excellent topic to discuss amongst our board following this webinar. This webinar will be redistributed on YouTube and on our various platforms, so you guys are able to share this amongst your networks. We want to thank you for joining us. If there's any questions, feel free to follow up with us via email. Myself or Mark would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.